Okay, I will admit, comic books are some of the hardest things to get into right away. There are decades of history with some of these characters, and when you walk into a comic book store and see racks upon racks of random magazines and graphic novels, you get a little overwhelmed. But that's the thing, why are they so hard to get into, and what can we do to fix this problem? Hello and welcome to the show with issues. I'm Auram.
And I'm Scott.
No, Scott, not yet. Anyway, to switch gears here for a second, I was playing Pokemon the other day, which got me thinking about something. See, I hadn't played a Pokemon game in quite a while at that point. Decided to jump into my copy of Alpha Sapphire and see if I could pick it up again, and to my surprise, everything clicked perfectly. Everything in those games is geared perfectly to welcoming back old and seasoned veterans while at the same time being completely open and accepting to new players. This made me wonder, why aren't comics this way? From my experience and what I've heard from others, the big world of comic books is extremely difficult to get into, and I'm not really sure why. So that's why this video exists.
Is it my turn to talk now? Okay, yeah, so I've also had a bit of a rough time breaking into comics myself, so I thought I'd stop by and see if I can help.
Let's get started. So starting off on our ever-important quest of figuring out why comics are so hard to get into is to actually answer the question itself. One of the main reasons comics are such a difficult hobby to pick up is because of continuity. Continuity is the idea of something sustaining itself over an indeterminate amount of time. In the case of comics, it's the idea of a shared world with characters who maintain their histories and relationships, just like our world. The problem with this is that, especially with the big two, these histories started decades ago. Think about it. If you were told that you had to read 75 years worth of comic books just to understand one issue of Iron Man that you saw in a comic book store one day, you would more than likely decide against reading that issue.
Right, and this isn't to say that the big two publishers haven't done things to remedy this. Marvel and DC have fixed their continuities in different ways. They both have done relaunches of titles, starting at #1 issues, with Marvel having a focus on jumping on points to bring in new readers. DC has even completely rebooted their universe to do away with a lot of their previous continuity and effectively starting all over. This solution seems to be way more effective at bringing in new readers, seeing as how they wouldn't need to read anything before a new series, but it does kinda get on the nerves of some of the existing readers. Take DC's New 52 reboot, for example. DC killed all of their previous continuity and released 52 new #1s, but to their surprise, this angered some longtime fans. They were outraged that all of the old stories they bought and read and protected over the years are now pointless and hold no substance. Now, personally, I think that this is completely ridiculous. The old stories still exist. They didn't go anywhere. Calm down.
I completely agree, but at this point you're probably wondering, if continuity is that big of a problem, why not just do away with it completely? This is actually something that has come up a lot lately in the comic book community and is a very heated subject. On one hand, continuity causes a lot of issues for new readers and is very prone to being confusing and convoluted, while on the other it can open the door for awesome crossover stories and feel rewarding to longtime readers. Going back to DC, they apparently heard this outcry and have been telling stories without continuity for the past few months under their new DCU banner. DCU effectively is an effort by DC to promote storytelling over having to maintain an airtight continuity. This is why you can see Superman as his normal caped self in one book, but at the same time see him in jeans and a t-shirt in another. The problem here though is that this unintentionally causes even more confusion. If you walked into a comic book store and saw two comics, one with normal Superman and one with him in his t-shirt, you'd probably assume they were two different characters, not two different stories and two different continuities.
Plus, that's just an entire issue in and of itself, the idea that there are multiple ongoing titles with the same characters happening simultaneously. If you're new to comics and you want to read a Batman comic, for example, you're gonna have to be a little bit more specific than that, since in the New 52 alone, there have been all kinds of titles featuring Batman as a main character. There's the main Batman comic, there's Detective Comics, Batman the Dark Knight, Batman Eternal, Batman Incorporated, Batman and Robin, Batman Superman, and so on. It can be completely overwhelming.
You know what? Yeah, that also reminds me of another problem with comics, the sheer saturation of the market. When there are so many options presented to you, how do you decide which to start with? And why would you take the time to make that decision in the first place? This is known as the paradox of choice, the concept that with too many options available, it becomes harder to make a final decision. In some cases, you might not even make a decision at all. This is something I struggled with for months before actually buying my first comics. I kept going back and forth on whether or not I should try to get into comics because every time I thought about trying, I would just get more and more confused and overwhelmed. So before we get into some solutions for how we can make comics easier to jump into, let's do a quick recap. For the most part, comics are difficult to get into because of the decades of continuity and the existence of so many comic books being released every week. Not to mention the backlog of issues that have developed over the past century almost. Still with us? Good. Now how do we fix it? Short answer, we really can't. After going on for this long, comics have become something entirely different than any other medium. But then there are things like Pokemon, that have games released every year that have a continuity, yet they're almost always an easy jumping on point. The reason for this is because of the formula that Pokemon games use. Each game almost always opens explaining what you're about to get yourself into. Welcome to the world of Pokemon. It also helps that Pokemon games are very easy to understand at face value, at least with the core games. You catch a Pokemon, press the fight button, press an attack, and make the green go red. Simple. Not to mention that Pokemon, and games in general, are structured in a way that forces you to understand everything before you can continue. Pokemon, for example, will place NPCs at detrimental places as roadblocks until you complete the next objective. So how come comics aren't replicating this? Well, if you really think about it, Marvel kind of is. Every few years, especially lately, Marvel releases a new wave of #1 titles that are advertised as perfect jumping on points for new readers, and even in the stories they have their recap pages that gets you up to speed with what's been going on in the past few issues. This just tells you everything you need to know. Marvel's even trying to change their characters to reflect their appearances on film and other mediums, which, regardless of how you feel about it, helps new readers to be less confused when reading a recent book.
Yeah, the idea of recap pages is something that I really wish DC did. I'd love to know a quick summary of what I've missed when I jump onto a new series, but let's not count DC out so fast. They're also doing things to help usher in new readers. DC also introduces these new comics that start at issue 1 every few months, and they even cancel a lot of their other titles in the process as a way of trying to limit the vast number of comics they sell each week. Plus, they've taken a new initiative recently to encourage their writers to focus less on confusing continuity and more on telling good stories. This hopefully means that you won't have to read a bunch of other comics just to understand what's happening in the one that you're reading. Batman can be Bruce Wayne in one book and Commissioner Gordon in another if that's what the story calls for, and you don't have to worry about how all the pieces fit together. Just enjoy the story.
So both Marvel and DC are at least attempting to clear up confusion in regards to continuity, but the truth of the matter is that there are still so many new comics released each week. So how do we fix the paradox of choice that comes with comics? The way I fixed this when I got into comics was to just follow one character and roll with it until I was ready to jump into something else. At the time, my favorite character was Iron Man because of the movies, so I wanted to read stuff with him in it. I did a quick Google search and found that Invincible Iron Man by Matt Fraction was a great series that people who watch the movies would be able to understand. I bought the first 2 trades of that and was instantly hooked, which led to me being exposed to other characters and those stories that I followed in other books. It also helped that Marvel Now was a thing that existed, and that made it very easy for me to find jumping on points that were pretty recent.
Something that helped me is getting one of those Marvel encyclopedias so that I could look up any characters I was unfamiliar with who happened to appear in any comic I was reading. I would also suggest starting with trades over single issues, and also figuring out not only what characters you like, but why you like them. If you like Batman, because I apparently can't stop talking about him in this video, that doesn't really help you find a good jumping on point since he's been around for forever. If you like him for his villains, we can find a good villain-centered story like Killing Joke or Hush, which involves a lot of his rogues gallery. If you like him for his detective skills, something like Dark Victory or Batman and the Monster Man might be right up your alley. If you want just some fun, silly reads, Batman 66 or most things from the Silver Age could be exactly what you're looking for. When you find out what characters you like and why you like them, it's as simple as doing a Google search for the stories that fit your particular interest. I think perhaps that's a hidden benefit to having almost a century of continuity. You have so many stories to pick and choose from that you're almost guaranteed to find one that fits your style. And because I like to end things on a positive note, I just want everyone to know that it's perfectly normal to feel overwhelmed when starting to read comics. Don't treat yourself like a noob who doesn't know anything, but rather as a lucky individual who has the opportunity to learn and discover the amazing world of comics for the first time. That's an experience I wish I could have again.
So there you go, why comics are so hard to get into and ways to fix it. I know we mostly talked about the big 2 here, and honestly there's less of a problem when it comes to indie stuff. Since every indie book normally has its own self-contained continuity, it's easier to get into, but the paradox of choice is still present there. In fact, I'd say it's even worse. We'll leave you with a question. If you read comics, how did you get into them? And do you have any ways to make that process easier? If you don't read comics, what's standing in your way? Let me know in the comments. It's the first week of September, and I'm now coming to the realization that Secret Wars is not even going to be finished before we get the first round of all new, all different Marvel stuff. Reboot, get your shit together. Jokes aside, I'll be getting 6 titles, including Deadpool vs. Thanos #1, Silk #7, and Thors #3. I'm interested to see what that Deadpool vs. Thanos book is all about. It doesn't seem to have the Secret Wars banner on it, so possibly set in the new Moo? Anyway, the rest of my pull list is in the description. But that's it for this week. I, for one, had an awesome time making this video, and honestly, I'm glad I've been able to put out so many of these opinion videos lately. me. Don't worry, those of you that prefer the Power Hour and Parallel side of things though, those will return soon. Like we said earlier, talk about your being introduced to comic stories in the comments. I'm interested in what you have to say. Oh, and of course, thanks so much to Scott for helping me out with this video and actually being in it. He's been such a supportive and helpful friend since I started this show stuff, and honestly, I couldn't ask for more.
Just don't start wearing bow ties. That's my thing.
Well, there go my plans for the next 2 years of this channel.
And if you want to watch more comic book videos, head on over to my channel, NerdSync, where I do a show called Comic Misconceptions. Go check it out.
That all being said, thank you so much for watching.
Next time, I buy a different mug, because this one is a hazard. It's right for the eyeball. All the time. If you're new to comics and you want to read a Batman comic, for example, you're gonna have to go blah, 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 words.